Well, hello, Margaret. Thank you for joining us for Thursday's Thought for Today. Do you want to just tell people how we know each other and a little bit about your role?
I remember you, Lindsay, from a way back in Drumchapel Hospital when you wore the uniform of a speech and language therapist and I wore a uniform of a physiotherapist. Seems a long time ago now.
It does.
I met you again at Presbytery when you were a student for ministry, and I think I was doing the report for World Mission at Presbytery.
Yeah.
I'm one of the ordained local ministers in Dumbarton Presbytery.
So an ordained local minister, for people that don't know what that means, is basically a fully ordained minister, but you don't receive any stipend. Is that right, Margaret?
That's right. Ministry of Word and Sacrament, but no pay.
And you were retired physiotherapist. So yeah, we have known each other, I think, since I was 19.
Wow.
A long time. And it's lovely that our paths met up again when I went into the ministry and recognised you at Dumbarton Presbytery as someone that I knew, a familiar, friendly face across the room. That was nice. So Margaret, I know that you have spent many years in Pakistan as a missionary. Would you like to just share with us today what your role entailed?
I went out to Pakistan as a very young physiotherapist to a hospital that, when it heard it was getting a physiotherapist, asked what size it was because they thought it was a machine. 5'2" and needs a house to live in. Physiotherapy in Pakistan was quite different. We saw patients that you don't see in this country because they often go to unskilled doctors before they present at the hospital. But it was very much like life here in Scotland. I worked as a physiotherapist in the hospital, but I also did, once I acquired Urdu, Sunday school teaching and worked with the Women's Fellowship, which is a bit like the Guild. And later on, I looked after the women's work in a Christian village about 80 miles away from the hospital, which involved a bit of traveling.
So when you've been out doing missionary work in Pakistan, has it always been in the role as a physiotherapist or other things?
My chief role was as a physiotherapist, and I worked mainly in Shiloh Hospital in Jalalpur Jutton, but I kind of got hired out to different places when they had an orthopedic consultant coming over from the States. I also trained up a young man to take over from me, and so that he had some experience of working independently, I worked in St. Joseph's Hospice up in Rawalpindi, which was about 100 miles away. And I went up there for a week every month and taught physiotherapy. And I was in the big city, and I could go to the British Council Library and I could buy things like butter.
So what was the differences and the challenges of, obviously you did physiotherapy in Glasgow, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, I think was where you worked for the majority of your career, is that right, Margaret? So what was the differences for you doing physiotherapy out in Pakistan?
I was alone. There were no other physiotherapists. When I first arrived, there was an Australian physiotherapist in Lahore, some 80 miles away. And she came once on a visit. I had virtually no equipment. There was very unreliable electricity, so you didn't want electrical equipment anyway. It, like here, was very much a person-to-person interaction. So it was great for having conversations. You chatted to people constantly.
Yeah. And was it difficult being in places where you saw poverty, or what was it like being away from home and seeing different sights?
I started off, and most of the time I was living kind of in community with the nurses who were from Scotland who worked in the hospital. And on one occasion, one of the hospital servants came to borrow money, and we were a bit concerned. And one of my colleagues and I looked at the budget with him, and then we realized we couldn't feed his family well on what he was earning. At times, and even yet, there is malnutrition in Pakistan, particularly in the under fives, usually protein malnutrition rather than the quantity of food, just the quality of food is not good. While I was there in 1973, there was a very, very bad flood. It ended with the north of the country being separated from the south of the country by just a huge lake of water, and the only way from north to south was by air. I came home that year when my father died, but when I went back, we were still trying to help out families who in the flood had lost everything. And what they were being provided with were pots and pans, soap, matches, and some bedding.
Yes, you've really seen people that have lost everything just starting again.
Yes.
I think what we were talking about on the phone the other day, Margaret, was when you look at the news and you see places that are really suffering, and what comes to mind today is Yemen, the massive humanitarian crisis that is happening there, and how the conflict has left people completely displaced, and the victims are quite often children, and we're seeing images on our television with children screaming out in pain with malnutrition, and there's not enough food and water and medical supplies, and the fear is if coronavirus comes there, they just don't have the supplies, they don't have the medical or healthcare facilities to help people. And you watch this on the news and you can get a sense of helplessness. Well, what can we do? What can we do sitting here in the West? What can we do to help? So as a Christian, how would you say we need to respond to things like this when we see them on the news, and thinking especially of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen?
I find the Yemen crisis really upsetting, because while I was in Pakistan, I worked with people who had started their missionary careers in Yemen, because the Church of Scotland worked there for a long time. I think it started in the late 19th century with Keith Falconer, who set up a medical mission. He was only there for a few months because he died of malaria.
Oh, goodness.
But the hospital was at Sheikh Othman, and it was helped for a number of years by the BB in Scotland.
All right.
They paid the salary of a doctor in the hospital for some years. And one of their projects at one time was to provide equipment for the hospital. So my friends who used to work in Yemen join me sometimes at events concerning Yemen, which Glasgow University sometimes run, and also Glasgow Loves Yemen, I think, is the organisation. Anything we do towards alleviating suffering in Yemen is welcome. Work is going on through UNICEF and through Tear Fund. A lot of it now is simply to provide soap and water for hand washing because of the coronavirus, and also supplying milk powder and such like to help feed children.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great mixture of chocolate and peanut butter and stuff that's really, really good in alleviating malnutrition.
Mm. I think the image that I saw in the news that just broke my heart, and all I could think of is if this was a child in the West and we were seeing images like this, then there would be an outpouring of charity support and money to alleviate the suffering. And this child was screaming in pain because it was so hungry, and the only thing the parent could do to feed his child was to dissolve sugar cubes in water, and that's the only food that they had for the child. And it was just heartbreaking. And that made me go on to UNICEF and to Tear Fund, and there's other organizations that are trying to do as much as they can to raise awareness of what we could do sitting here to help. And that made us think that, well, yes, we've got our own pandemic happening here, but we've got this wonderful NHS that we both work for. And just the level of care and support that people that we know that have been sick get living in a country that has an NHS like we do. But we can't just sit back and do nothing. And we were thinking, if we were still in our church building, we would still be having we would have a retiring collection for something like this. And just because we can't physically be in our church building doesn't mean that we don't have to respond, or we can't respond to things like this. So we're still trying to have a retiring collection that will hopefully go out to one of the charities that is trying its best to get aid where it's needed.
I think one of the problems is because Yemen is Muslim, people have a bit of antipathy towards them. I think we have to remember that Islam and Christianity have a shared history way back with Judaism, and we are all people of the book, and we all try to follow God, albeit in different ways.
Mm-hmm. I know. And also, like, just because I think people can just be so overwhelmed by watching images on the news that they just switch off, but we can't, or they think they can't do anything. But as you say, we can't be like that. We are all made in the image of God, and we need to see each human being as being important and special and precious to God. We just can't sit back. We, of course, we have prayer, and we don't stop praying for the suffering in throughout the world, but we can act as well.
And so much of it is a proxy war with Saudi on one side and Houthis and various forces. It doesn't, to a great extent, come from the Yemeni people themselves.
They're the victims. The children are the victims. There's no doubt about that. The other statistic I had was within a space of a couple of years, 85,000 children have lost their life to starvation. And it's as a mother now, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. And I keep thinking about, well, imagine that I was a mother there and I have to watch my children scream in pain because they're hungry and I can't feed them. And people are displaced and living in situations that they didn't choose to because of a conflict that they don't want. But thank you, Margaret, for sharing with us today. I know you're a woman of deep faith yourself. How do you cope in challenging times? Can you share something about how your faith sustains you?
I think it's having a knowledge that God is with you. He's not somewhere distant, but close beside you. It's like having your parent or your sibling or someone always there. You're not alone. And just following where God leads. I sometimes worry that I don't have much fear, but yes, I don't fear because I have trust in God.
Beautiful. I was just reading, where is it in the Psalm? God is our refuge and our strength. And it's just a reminder that we don't, no matter what we're facing, people might be listening today and feeling overwhelmed by one of many life's burdens that come our way. None of us are immune to suffering. We're all going to suffer at some point. But it's just knowing that we don't go through life alone. God is always there, ready to strengthen us and support us and guide us and lead us where he wants us to be at all times.
The Psalms are very important in Pakistan. They sing some hymns, but the Pakistani hymn book, most used part is the Psalms, which are sung in Punjabi as opposed to hymns, which are often sung in Urdu. And if you ask me where to find a quote in the Psalms, if I translate it into Punjabi, I can probably give you the number quicker.
Good. You're some women, Margaret, not only going across to work in a place that you weren't brought up in, but learning the language as well. It's just amazing. And you were amazing support to me when I was studying theology, because being a mum of 2 and then 3 children, I never had the time to go to the library, and you have a very vast array of books in your own personal library. So I was always borrowing books from you to get the essays done.
But you always returned them.
I did. Oh no, it's important to return books. I like my books myself. Well, Margaret, thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing, and we do hope our own little appeal to raise funds for Yemen people respond. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Bye for now.
I hope you get a good response to your appeal.
Thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.